The wine hit my face before I even saw his hand move. Red, warm, dripping down my cheek like something out of a nightmare I never asked to live in. The entire banquet hall went silent. 200 guests. Crystal glasses frozen midair. And my brother-in-law standing there, chest heaving, pointing his finger at me like I was something dirty he needed to scrape off his shoe. "Get lost," he said. "You don't belong here, you never did." My name is Amara Chen, and 3 minutes later, a man in a black suit ran across that entire ballroom, pushed past 200 of the wealthiest people in the city, and dropped to one knee in front of me. "Madam President," he said, breathless, "the car is ready whenever you're ready to leave." You should have seen my brother-in-law's face. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with wine or wealth or titles. It starts 4 years earlier, in a kitchen that smelled like burnt rice and quiet humiliation. I married into the Whitfield family when I was 26. My husband, Daniel, was gentle in a way that made me forget the world could be cruel. He worked in logistics, nothing flashy, and I worked as an assistant hotel manager at a mid-range property downtown. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We were just trying, building something small and honest together. His older brother, Marcus, was the golden child. Investment banker, corner office, a laugh that filled every room he walked into, as long as you were someone worth laughing with. And I was never that. From the very first family dinner, I felt it. The way his eyes swept over my department store dress. The way he introduced me to his colleagues as Daniel's wife instead of using my name. "She works at a hotel," he told his friends once, swirling his drink, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Front desk, I think, or close to it." I was standing right there, 6 feet away, holding a plate of appetizers I'd offered to pass around because nobody else volunteered. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table that night. "Ignore him," he whispered. "He's like that with everyone." He wasn't. He was like that with me. For 4 years, I swallowed it. The comments about my clothes. The way Marcus's wife, Bianca, would casually mention the price of her handbag in front of me, then smile like she hadn't meant anything by it. The way I was seated at the far end of every holiday table, near the kids, near the door, near nothing that mattered. I told myself it didn't matter. I had Daniel. I had my work, which I loved more than I ever let on, the quiet satisfaction of solving problems nobody saw, of making strangers feel like they mattered for the 3 days they stayed under our roof. I told myself that dignity didn't need an audience. But some nights after family dinners, I'd sit in our car in the driveway and just breathe. Daniel would reach over, rub my shoulder, and say the same thing every time. "One day they'll see you, I promise." I never believed him, not really. Some part of me thought this was just what my life would be, the quiet woman in the corner, tolerated, never celebrated. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed. Not with a single dramatic moment, but slowly, the way tides shift before you notice the shoreline has moved. The hotel I worked for was acquired by a much larger hospitality group, one with properties across the country, from coastal resorts to downtown towers. During the transition, I was asked to consult on operations, then to lead a task force. Then, 18 months later, in a boardroom that still smelled like fresh paint, I was offered a position I never imagined for myself. President of Regional Operations, 14 properties, 900 employees. I remember sitting across from the CEO, an older woman named Patricia Osei, who had built this company from a single motel off a highway exit 40 years ago. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said something I've never forgotten. "People will underestimate you your whole life, Amara. The ones who are smart will stop the moment they realize their mistake. The ones who don't stop, you don't owe them anything." I didn't tell the Whitfields, not at first. Daniel knew, of course. He'd been my anchor through every late night, every anxious phone call, every moment I doubted I deserved any of it. But we made a decision together, quiet and unspoken, not to announce it, not to prove anything. I told myself I didn't need Marcus's approval. I told myself I was past needing anyone to see me. But if I'm honest, and this is the part that's hard to admit, some small, stubborn piece of me was waiting waiting for the right moment, waiting to stop being invisible. That moment arrived on a Saturday evening in October, at the grand opening of the Wilshire Grand Ballroom, one of the properties under my new company's management. Marcus and Bianca had booked their 20th wedding anniversary celebration there months earlier, long before the property changed ownership, long before any of us knew our paths would cross under that particular roof. I found out only 2 weeks before the event, when the venue coordinator sent me the guest list for final security clearance. I saw the name Whitfield and felt my stomach drop. Daniel wanted to skip it. "We don't have to go," he said, standing in our kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight in a way I rarely saw. "You don't owe him a night of pretending everything's fine." "It's your family," I said quietly. "Your parents will be there. Your niece is turning 8 next month. She made me a card, Daniel. We're going." So we went. I wore a navy dress, simple, elegant, nothing that screamed for attention. I wasn't there as the president of anything. I was there as Daniel's wife, the way I'd always been. The plan was to stay quiet, smile through dinner, and leave early. I didn't know that Marcus had been drinking since 4 in the afternoon. I didn't know that his firm had passed him over for a partnership that same week, a wound he was nursing with expensive scotch, and a temper that had been fraying at the edges all evening. I didn't know that Bianca had spent the cocktail hour needling him about keeping up appearances, about how this anniversary needed to be perfect, needed to prove something to everyone watching. I only know that somewhere around 8:30, as dinner was being cleared and the band was setting up, Marcus stood up from the head table with a glass of red wine in his hand, swaying slightly, and made his way toward me. "You know," he said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "I never understood what my brother saw in you. 4 years and you still don't fit." Daniel stood up immediately. "Marcus, that's enough." "No, let her hear it." His voice cracked with something ugly, something that had been building for years and finally found a target. "You've spent 4 years at every family event looking like you don't belong because you don't. You work a service job. You smile at strangers for a living. And somehow you think that makes you one of us." The room had gone quiet around us, the way a room does right before something breaks. "Marcus," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. That's when the glass tipped, whether by accident or intention, I still don't fully know. The wine hit my face and chest in one cold, humiliating wave, and the sound of 200 people gasping at once is something I will never forget as long as I live. "Get lost," he said, standing over me, chest heaving. "You don't belong here, you never did." I stood frozen, wine dripping from my chin onto the navy dress I'd chosen so carefully, feeling every eye in that ballroom on my skin like a physical weight. Daniel moved toward his brother, fists clenched, and for one terrible second, I thought this night was going to end in something none of us could take back. And that's when I heard footsteps, fast, urgent, crossing the entire length of that grand ballroom. I turned, wine still dripping down my face, and saw the Wilshire Grand's general manager, a man named Thomas Reyes, someone I had personally hired 8 months earlier, pushing past stunned guests, past waiters frozen with trays in their hands, moving straight toward me with a look of pure panic on his face. He dropped to one knee in front of me, right there on the ballroom floor, in front of every single person Marcus had ever wanted to impress. "Madam President," he said, his voice carrying further than he probably intended, "I am so sorry. The car is ready outside whenever you'd like to leave. And sir," he turned, looking directly at Marcus, whose face had gone the color of the wine now soaking through my dress, "I need to inform you that under Section 14 of our venue contract, we reserve the right to terminate any event involving conduct that endangers or humiliates our guests, including, unfortunately, family members of the host." Marcus stared at Thomas, then at me. I watched something shift behind his eyes, confusion, then disbelief, then a dawning horror that seemed to physically shrink him where he stood. "Madam President," he repeated, the words barely making it out of his mouth. Bianca had gone pale at the head table. Daniel's parents were staring at me like they were seeing me for the first time in 4 years. I wiped the wine from my chin with the back of my hand, slowly, and looked at my brother-in-law, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in this entire marriage. "You wanted to know what your brother saw in me," I said quietly, my voice somehow steady despite my heart slamming against my ribs. "I think you're about to find out." Thomas was still kneeling there, waiting for my answer, and I realized the entire ballroom was waiting too. 200 people who moments ago had watched me get humiliated were now watching something else entirely, something none of them had a script for. "Thank you, Thomas," I said, my voice quiet but carrying further than I expected. "Give us a moment." He rose, nodded once, and stepped back, but not far. Close enough that I understood, without him saying it, that he wasn't leaving me alone in that room. Not after what he'd just seen. Marcus hadn't moved. He stood there with the empty wine glass still dangling from his fingers, his mouth slightly open, searching for words that weren't coming. I'd never seen him lost for anything. Not once in 4 years. "Madam President of what, exactly?" Bianca finally said from the head table, her voice sharp, trying to claw back some control over a night that had just slipped entirely out of her hands. I turned to her. To all of them, really, Daniel's parents, his aunts and uncles, the cousins who'd spent 4 Thanksgivings pretending not to notice how I was seated near the door. 18 months ago, I became president of regional operations for Halden Hospitality Group, I said. "We own and manage 14 properties, this one included." I paused, letting that settle. I didn't mention it before tonight because it never occurred to me that it should matter. I thought foolishly, maybe, that I'd already proven who I was just by showing up, by staying, by loving your family even when your family made it very clear they didn't want me in it. Nobody spoke. Somewhere behind me, I heard a waiter quietly clearing a plate, the only sound in a room that had otherwise stopped breathing. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Amara, I had no idea if I'd known." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. Not cruelly, just honestly because I genuinely wanted to know. "If you'd known I ran 14 hotels instead of working the front desk of one, would that have changed how you spoke to me tonight, or any night before this one?" He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth, and saying it out loud would have cost him something he wasn't ready to give up yet, the last scrap of dignity he had left in that room. Daniel stepped closer to me then, slipping his jacket off his shoulders and draping it gently over mine, covering the wine stains spreading across my dress. His hand found mine, and he held it the way he'd held it in the car all those nights, after all those dinners, when I'd sat in silence trying not to cry. "She's been running 14 hotels for a year and a half," he said, looking at his brother, "and never once asked you to treat her differently because of it. She wanted you to treat her with basic decency because she's your family. That's all she ever wanted, Marcus, and you couldn't even give her that." I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to let myself cry in front of these people. Not tonight. I'd given this family 4 years of small, quiet tears in car seats and bathroom mirrors. Tonight wasn't going to be another one of those nights. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, rose slowly from her seat at the head table. She was 71 years old, a woman who rarely raised her voice, who I'd always found kind in a distant, careful sort of way, kind enough to defrost the ice her older son had built around our family, but never quite brave enough to melt it entirely. She walked toward me, and for a moment I braced myself, unsure what was coming. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Not just for tonight, for every dinner where I let this happen and said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere between siblings. But watching what just happened here," she glanced at Marcus, disappointment written plainly across her face. "I think my silence was its own kind of cruelty. I'm sorry, Amara, truly." It wasn't the moment I'd imagined, if I'd ever let myself imagine a moment like this at all. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction the way I might have pictured in my angriest, most exhausted nights. Just a tired, aching relief, the kind that comes after holding your breath for so long you forget what it feels like to exhale. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said softly. "That means more than you know." Marcus set the wine glass down on a nearby table, his hands unsteady. He looked older suddenly, the confidence that had carried him through every family gathering for years now visibly cracking at the edges. I lost the partnership this week, he said quietly, not quite looking at anyone. 15 years at that firm, and they gave it to someone who'd been there half as long. He trailed off, shook his head. That's not an excuse, I know it's not, You don't get to explain this away by telling me about your bad week, I said, and I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine, steadying me, or maybe steadying himself. You've spent 4 years making me feel small in front of people I wanted to love. Tonight isn't about your partnership, Marcus. Tonight is about a pattern you've had since the very first dinner I sat at your table. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in 4 years, I watched something in him deflate completely. Not out of embarrassment at being caught, but something that looked, finally, like real understanding. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight, he said. I don't think I'd forgive me either. I didn't respond right away. Some silences don't need to be filled. Thomas approached again, quieter this time, and leaned toward me. Madam President, the car is still available whenever you're ready. And I want to say, I'm sorry this happened in one of our properties. It won't affect the venues standing with the anniversary event unless you'd like us to proceed differently. I looked around the ballroom, at Daniel's niece, 8 years old, sitting wide-eyed at a nearby table, watching adults behave in ways children shouldn't have to witness. At the band, still standing awkwardly by their instruments, unsure whether to play or wait. At 200 faces caught somewhere between shock and second-hand embarrassment. Let the party continue, I said. For the guests, for the family who came here to celebrate something good. I turned to Daniel. I think we should go, though. I don't need to stay for the rest of this. He nodded, already reaching for my arm. But before we left, I turned back to Marcus one last time. Not for revenge, not even for closure, really. Just because I needed him to hear it clearly once without the whine or the humiliation clouding the moment. I never needed you to be impressed by me, I said. I needed you to be kind. Those aren't the same thing, and I think you confused them for a very long time. I hope you figure out the difference before it costs you something you can't get back. We walked out of that ballroom together, Daniel's jacket still around my shoulders, the wine stain hidden beneath it. Thomas walked us to the car himself, apologizing again, though I told him gently that none of this had been his fault. The drive home was quiet. Daniel held my hand the entire way, his thumb tracing slow circles across my knuckles, the way he always did when words weren't quite enough. I'm proud of you, he finally said, somewhere past the city lights, past the quiet suburban streets leading back to our small, unglamorous, deeply loved home. You didn't need any of what happened back there to prove your worth. You've always had it. Tonight just made everyone else finally see it. I leaned my head against the window, watching the streetlights blur past, feeling the ache in my chest slowly loosen for the first time in years. I know, I said quietly, but it feels good to stop being invisible, just this once. He squeezed my hand. You were never invisible to me. And that was the truth that mattered most, in the end. Not the title, not the 14 properties or the boardroom or the moment Thomas dropped to one knee in front of 200 stunned guests. Just this, a man who had seen me clearly since the very first day, long before anyone else bothered to look. Marcus called 3 weeks later. I let it go to voicemail the first 2 times. On the third, I finally answered, and we talked, carefully, honestly, for the first time in 4 years. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. Some wounds don't close just because someone finally says sorry, but it was a start. A door left open, even if neither of us walked through it completely that day. Elinor started calling me every Sunday after that, just to talk, the way mothers are supposed to talk to the women their sons love. Small gestures, late, but not too late. As for me, I went back to work that Monday morning, walked into my office on the 9th floor, and looked out over a city that had spent 4 years deciding I didn't belong in rooms like this one. I belonged there, I always had. I just needed the room to catch up.